Welcome to episode 3, Cyber Hygiene and the Modern MSP Advantage. With me today, Jonathan Brucato. Hopefully you've been with us on episode 1 and episode 2. We're going to draw down now on the theme of cyber hygiene, phishing simulations, and the regulatory landscape. 3 key items that we think are really important when we talk about cyber hygiene. So for you, Jonathan, when we think about cyber hygiene, most people say it's like, hey, knowing is half the battle. Maybe it sounds like the GI Joe simulation. Knowing is half the battle. Experience is actually an embedded way to get it into people's heads. So for you, when we talk about cyber hygiene, more than just awareness, give us some insight to how you put that into action, why it's so important, and for companies to really think about that as a way to defeat the bad guys.
Yeah, the bedrock that I stand on in everything that we do is really 2 principles. So security through layers, which is I'm not relying on one technology or configuration or training to make me secure, right? It's in everything. It's multi-layered, multi-pronged. And kind of the second thing is secure by design. So when we implement a new human program, technology program, a new piece of software, we're going through the security controls. We are evaluating, how does this fit into our security posture? How does this fit in the grand scheme of, how we control the user experience? So those 2 things really kind of govern everything. When we write new code for our tools or our products, we're critiquing them through the security lens, making sure that they're passing unit testing and things like that. When we're implementing a new human process, I said it in a previous podcast, but the who are you, where are you, what are you? Going through the principles of who the target is for this particular use case or this particular program. How are they getting through this program, or how are they interacting with this from a business perspective? And how do we make sure that their experience is secure and controlled, right? Um, the continuous protection element really is continuous through the layers of the business just as much as it is continuous on a timeline. It's continuous in everything that we do. It's ubiquitous. So at face value, sounds a bit like generalization, but it's as simple as saying, did we consider the security elements of this thing that we did for our business, and how does it fit in the grand scheme multi-layer security approach that we're taking?
It's interesting. So recapping that one is you have process and procedures, which are really important for people to understand. Practicing that and scrimmaging around it so that people experience, that the team members experience what that really means, can fail or succeed. But then looking at the output and then finding ways to embed that into the daily roles and where people are. So cybersecurity isn't just about training. It's not just about testing people, but it's also starting to learn the muscle memory of the enterprise and how it works, and coming back in and modifying as well, and ensuring that how we work is also embedded into how we secure.
Yeah, I'd say also there's not by implementing a solution, a technology, a procedure, doing it one time doesn't mean that it's secure a year from now, right? Continuous evaluation of systems, auditing, pen testing, configuration review, configuration management, posture management. These are all concepts that mean that, hey, we're going back to this at some point in the future to make sure that we're still doing it correctly. Extremely hygienic method of maintaining security in your environment.
Awesome. Very helpful. All right. So that takes me into the second one, which is the importance of phishing simulations, employee training, compliance readiness. Um, we have some examples of that we use with clients when we're talking to them about where and how to go do these things. Right? Is it really important? I mean, why a phishing simulation? Like, why is that so important to put people into the middle of that?
Sure. The thing with phishing simulations, in my opinion, they should be done often, right? The landscape changes faster than a once a year annual training and reminder on don't click links that you didn't expect to see, right? Um, we spoke in a previous podcast about, how attackers are using AI to, increase the genuine output of their attacks, that they feel authentic, that they feel very real. Um, these types of things need to be trained against constantly. We know about, phishing, but now we're seeing smishing, we're seeing quishing, we're seeing all of these different iterations where, somebody might receive a QR code these days, somebody might receive a Teams message with a phishing link, somebody might receive a text message. I've seen snail mail, right? There's all sorts of different ways that these types of user awareness activities and scenarios are evolving, right? So training often and training frequently is going to train, behaviorally your users to think about this more often. If we keep it in their minds, it's likely that their gut instinct is going to tell them to second guess what's in front of them if they even have an inkling of skepticism.
It's interesting because I was actually thinking about QR codes, right? Um, and people are getting more used to. In fact, it's interesting. 10 years ago, people were like, "Who's going to scan a QR code?" Right now, everybody's scanning QR codes. So, be interesting to see when that becomes a mainstream of being able to redirect somebody to a malicious site where you're entering in credentials through that mechanism. Um, and I think that's an opportunity, hopefully, for a two-way trust that if you don't get the right trust, you can't enter in your credentials. So that ties maybe into the whole password conversation as well. Um, it is wildly interesting where things are going to. In fact, somebody told me the other day that like announcing your new job, right, which is a LinkedIn thing, right? Congrats! I just started working at, right, and then immediately the phishing scams start, right? The smishing, right, is that person starts getting a message from the CEO of the company, which is not a phone number that's associated with the CEO of the company, and and depending on who it is, because I've had some people before have some fun with this, is hey, would you go get some Apple cards for me, right? And it's like I'm in a meeting, I'm too busy, and then and the response that they'll and again is playing back and forth. The response is, well, why are you asking me this when I'm sitting across from you inside the meeting, right? And then they stop, right? But the number of times in my past I've had to go through and make people aware is I will never ask for this, right? But it's the new person coming in, CEO contacting me, hey, I welcome to the team, you're really great. Hey, I need you to do me a favor, right? So it is crazy that maybe what is old is new. And what is new is just a new mechanism and maybe some of the stuff that was old to begin with.
Yeah, there's
Um,
there's um there's all sorts of different ways that this is manifesting itself in the open source world. The same way, we just talked for a second about how this is all about layers, right? How you present yourself in public is also an element of security to consider as a business. When we make LinkedIn profiles, when we're posting on social media, this information can be extremely revealing. I think that it's fair as an organization or as a business to, you know, kind of mandate sort of a code of conduct, how you represent yourself in the public internet, right? It's also a little bit or a lot of bit about brand reputation, right? But a little bit as well, about keeping your business secure. Revealing too much information can be dangerous. These platforms are wide open for abuse. There are bots that are constantly trying to, gain initial access through building a relationship on LinkedIn. Saw a security researcher post in his bio. When you send me a message, please drop your source code. And found just bots just shipping code, raw code, into his inbox. So there's all sorts of stuff like that going on, but the security through layers extends into that boundary for sure.
yeah, and the expediting of it, and again, doesn't require humans in the middle of it, right? And I talked to a bot today, which answering was an answering service that sounded like a person. They let me know ahead of time that hey, I'm an AI bot and an answering service. But if it hadn't said that, other than maybe when it repeated every question that I answered back to me, um, I probably wouldn't have known it. That leads me now into this regulatory landscape, right? And it's alphabet soup, right? There's the California Protection Act that exists today. Massachusetts has one across the US. You talked earlier in one of the other podcasts about lack of standards around credentialing, how people are using passkeys. Maybe you can relate a little bit there. GDPR, right? So company that exists in the US, but also operates in UK falls underneath those. So one standard doesn't necessarily meet the other. SEC requirements, HIPAA requirements. Are there standards that you can build off of that maybe represent at least a standard framework that then you can build from that says, hey, this is the ground floor that if you do this, then you can build on top of it versus having to build controls for GDPR, controls for PII, depending on where you are, CCPA, or HIPAA type rules. Is there a baseline like around NIST or ISO that you can go use that at least starts you off that I'm not repeating myself every single time? And then what's the need to really start to integrate into this, right? Because it does feel like from a business perspective, while a global company, insert any manufacturing company around the globe that delivers product sets, has the revenue and the profit to be able to go do this. The GLDA type stuff that came out, Gramm-Leach-Bliley acts that came out, those were tremendously hard on small companies, right? The small banks that were community banks or single banks versus a B of A that can really consume that and move through it. So it seems like regulation can bury the smaller organizations where the larger organizations can withstand the push. Do we see the same thing happening here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you said it a little bit earlier, like there's a lot about, some of this stuff is, conventional wisdom that's old as time, right? Um, we've been doing role-based access since the 70s on data systems, right? This business of secure by design, taking a holistic and sensitive approach to as we integrate a new system, as we move our data to SharePoint or start exposing it to Copilot, things like that. Same principles still apply. A small business might have an easier time objectively adopting, sensitivity labels on their data or reintegrating with a new RBAC policy on top of a data set. Re-permissioning things as they move into a new system or technology. Um, I think that larger organizations have a bigger budget to be able to sort through the larger source material, but smaller companies can be nimble and agile. And, a lot of resources here at ECI, we're using largely informed CIS benchmarks to build our standards and best practices. Obviously, when we look at, going to the full, in totality security control in something like a CIS benchmark, we have to consider like how this is going to affect user experience and functionality. But these programs are widely available. Some of the NIST stuff is a really great can be a really great asset to look at when you're considering your GDPR compliance, for example. Um, there are a litany of other, this is alphabet soup on the regulatory agencies, or security agencies, but CISA has a SCUBA framework that's also really compelling. And by following sort of the baselines that are out there, when you go through an audit, suddenly you're really a leg up, right? And these are things that can scale from a small organization to a large. We see it in our smallest customers and our largest customers. It doesn't have to be a tremendous cost burden. It really just has to have some thought and care put into it.
I think that's interesting, and I think explicitly when you talk about even things like SEC, right? I think I'll start with first. In fairness to the large organizations that are out there, they also have a much more robust and span of control that they have to handle. So while they have larger teams, they also have a massive amount of complexity that goes along with it, and as well as global reach. But they have the ability to do that. I was talking to a local bank, and they were talking about the amount of controls that are being thrown at them. They're in an audit almost, one or two audits almost every month. It's just it's insane to hear. I think it's interesting even in our world, right? Is if you take a private equity, the portfolio companies have a requirement to meet a certain baseline of SEC requirements of controls over how they perform and what they do in cybersecurity, right? So we have a responsibility to RP to be able to go do that, as well do all the portcos that are part of it. So I think that understanding the downstream effect of that as well is really important. Hopefully, to some of the listeners that are listening today, is the importance of it, but also there is a simplicity to it. To your point, is once you do the first one, you know where you stand, right? And negligence isn't really an excuse for allowing something to happen. We should be able to move forward, and setting a baseline and improvement month over month, quarter over quarter is really important for organizations to follow. I want to jump into. Sorry, did you have something you wanted to say to that first?
Yeah, I was just going to give a quick tip. So before, we talked on a previous podcast about AI enablement, right? A really good way to look at how we could use AI here is we can train a model to understand what our positioning is on our compensated controls, our technologies, our configuration, and how we approach the problem for customers that, or really any organization that has a high volume of due diligence. Activities and exercises. It's a great way to be able to say, hey, here's my 100 questions. How many of these can you answer? Rip it through a model, see how quickly you can get answers back, and then fill in the gaps. That's a good cheat code to be able to get up to speed.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll go develop one of those in Copilot Studio after we get off the call. So, look, I think those are really great points. Okay, I have two more for you because it was one of the blogs that we started. I think you're driving right now. Why is a modern service provider a better approach to cybersecurity, right? And if you had asked me that question 5 years ago, I'd give you a different answer than I would give today. I see a lot of the reasons why the service provider has, specifically the modern service provider that has a vast span of control over data, cloud, endpoints, and cyber across the organization and access. Why is it an unfair advantage for the modern service provider in the cybersecurity realm?
I think it's two things. I think number one, it's reachability. So you just kind of touched on it, access to systems to be able to take action, right? In the security realm, the plight of an MSSP is, getting getting all of our ducks in the row to take that next step. So we've seen this indicator of compromise. We've seen, presence of a threat actor on our network. Like, what's the next thing that we need to do? Is it isolate the asset where we found presence? Is it, block a destination to a command and control server? Um, the plight of a modern service provider is that, with great power comes great responsibility. That reachability, that access actually really enables us to be quicker, to write better, automations and playbooks we're moving into an agentic realm. We're moving into infrastructure as code realm, and the width in which we can reach is massively powerful. The second thing is, we've got all of these real world examples of where security controls, technology controls get applied to practical real world experience, and it really informs kind of how we approach detections, how we approach security controls moving forward. That next new customer, how can we improve their experience by what we know about these several other experiences of the past. Everything that we do in the service provider world informs how we approach the security problem, right? We have this cyclical value add that's constantly producing gains, right?
I think it's a pretty spot on. I unfortunately led the witness into where I wanted you to go versus asking you, do you think or why? Um, that said, is I've seen it in action a number of times. So you see a disk doing something that over a period of time has never done that before. Monitoring tools will alert us and let us know. You immediately have somebody who's already monitoring that device, that system, that service that in a SIM gets lost, right? Sometimes. So we are able to filter that out based on noise, based on consistency, and understanding the process. So that leads me into my next question, which is with the cybersecurity platform that you've deployed, that you're responsible for. Um, how are you filtering out noise, creating fidelity in what's going on across that footprint you just talked about, right? Because it isn't just the reachability, it's the accessibility, but it's also the intake piece and the fidelity that you're getting across devices of understanding normal versus abnormal from a business perspective.
Yeah, I mean, from like in like the detection realm and the information gathering realm, our managed XDR platform is really driven and iterated upon by what is security relevant. Like when we look at data sets, when we if it's a firewall, if it's a a cloud site or something of that kind, what's the security relevant information that I can potentially gather here, and what is what am I seeing in the wild from this type of data set? So we're, constantly performing threat hunting exercises. We're doing purple teaming exercises where, we're gathering the latest, malware sample, detonating it in our lab, running it through the same tools that we deploy to customers, and just kind of evaluating, did we have this data coming from this data set? Is there a vacancy? Am I missing the plot line by having too much noise? So it's this fine dance that we do in the detection realm. I'll say it's informed on a previous topic that we covered. Having good data controls, having a good security program that's building proper configurations and thoughtful configurations helps keep that noise level down. So we have to kind of drive what we learn in the wild from the log gathering space back into the MSP space to say, hey, look, like this is noisy. We have to come up with a better way to control this technology um, for the greater good, right? So this is us feeding the information back into the service provider loop.
This hits probably the last question for this session in episode 3, but post event, post incident, right? And if you look at a pure MSSP player again versus the modern service provider, the post incident of the rebuild and helping an organization recover, right? What's the advantage of the modern service provider inside that role?
While we do have, our security operations center and our security operations team, running independently of, maybe the account teams, or the service teams that work with our customers day in and out, that doesn't mean that they're not, constantly working in conjunction with one another. Post incident or live incident, it's very, very, typical to see day-to-day service teams, working in lockstep with our SOC to be able to, provide anecdotal information, tribal knowledge, things of that kind that are very close to the technologies that are functioning at the system at the customer. So when we come to, needing to remediate or we need to contain, we have that tribal knowledge to be able to go back and say, this is why we're seeing this, or this is a red herring, or this is a false positive, or this might have been the front door being left wide open, right? So that feedback loop with the day-to-day service folks really enables us to be quicker, to not chase dead ends, and really hone in on the problem. And then, the taking action steps, the blocking, the destination at an next-gen firewall, the isolating the asset. These types of things are, tools that we would use on the service side just as well as a security incident, right? So we can hop in, we can take action, directly into the customer's technology, which is really unique for us as a business that's both an MSP and MSSP.
Yeah. I think the extensibility where I've seen a new client come in that's been through this is our ability to rebuild and the knowledge base, not only from a cybersecurity side, as you mentioned, right, as well the teams have different functionality happening on a day in and day out basis, right? One's focused purely on cyber and noise and what's happening. The other is the operational uptime, consistency, and reliability that's there. They do come together on a regular basis, but in the mode of coming in is being able to touch firewalls, routers, switches, endpoints, understanding the playbook, having the hand in the cybersecurity team to talk about, least privilege access, the red-forced ideas of most precious things in the back of the realm, right? So that they're not out there in the front. So those all get deployed, which typically you would struggle with a pure MSP or a pure MSSP being able to really deliver on that commitment on that side. And so you're getting really is that the ability to fabricate a defensible system in a rebuild mode after an incident from an organization that understands both sides of the coin, from a practice and a subject matter expertise. So, anyways, sorry, that's more words in your mouth, but we've talked about that a few times as well. So I think very interesting. Jonathan, thank you for being with us today and sharing with us your knowledge, as always.
Absolutely.
And for the listeners today, thank you. I hope this was beneficial. There are a lot of pieces here. Again, we love to have the conversation. We'd love to talk about cybersecurity. If there are questions that you have and you want to just peek in and talk to our experts here, please let us know. We would love to chat with you. And again, thank you for joining in. We look forward to talking to you next time on our podcast.
Thank you.